I'd like to call to order this special CRA meeting. Today is July 29th, and the time is 10 o'clock a.m. Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry, probably Jose, right? Jose, you're going to walk us through this process?
Good morning, Mayor.
All right.
Actually, it's going to.
Okay, I want to get rid of the feedback. It's going to be the HR director, Mr. Rodriguez, and myself that are going to manage for the CRA board this morning.
Very good.
I'd like to first know whether or not the board has any questions regarding the process so that we can clarify the process if need be, and then we can get started, Mayor.
Okay. I don't see any questions. Board members, any questions? I don't see any, Madam City Administrator, so we could proceed.
Thank you. Okay, members of the board, good morning again. Today is the board's interview of the two candidates for the position of Executive Director of the Community Redevelopment Agency, our CRA. Your first candidate is Allison Justice, who is currently serving as the Interim Executive Director for the CRA. Ms. Justice.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me today, board.
All right, Ms. Johnson, is the process, is there an opening statement from each candidate? Then we're going to go down questions in order. Elaborate, please.
We did not fill in an opening statement, but certainly at the board's pleasure, each candidate can be allowed to give an opening statement, and then the board can start with the preset questions.
All right. This is a lot easier when we're on the dais, so I could just, we could go down in order. So I'll ask board members, do not move, because I'm going to go in the same order as your picture is showing up. Okay. So if you move around, then it's going to totally confuse me. All right, so why don't we start with someone talking? All right, Ricardo, I need you to mute. Ricardo, mute, please. Okay. We'll start with Madam President. First question to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Justice, for being here today. Our first question is, could you share with us your experience, education, and background that have prepared you to become the CRA Executive Director for the City of West Palm Beach?
First of all, again, good morning. Thank you, Madam President, for the question. My experience within CRAs, I will start a little bit with my education. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University, Kansas State University, which I will tell you is beneficial in this job as well in dealing with the public. I also have a master's in business from Florida Atlantic University. I am a certified redevelopment professional within the Florida Redevelopment Association, meaning that I've been trained in Chapter 163, Part 3, which is a statute that guides CRAs. I've spent 8 years, the last 8 years, with Redevelopment Management Associates. Was trained by two of the most well-respected redevelopment professionals in the business, and the last 6 years in the West Palm Beach CRA as a senior project manager, deputy director, and currently as the interim executive director.
Thank you. Next question will be asked by Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just pull it up here. Good morning, Ms. Justice. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Great. Identify what you consider the top 3 skills you possess which will make you successful in the position of CRA Executive Director. What do you think your biggest challenge in the position will be, and how would you overcome it?
Again, thank you for the question. So the top 3 I might have to have you repeat, but the top three skills, one would be obviously, I believe communication, and communication with my board members, my advisory board members, and the community at large. I represent this agency when I'm out in the public. I believe it's important to have the communication skills to meet with the public in order to try and gain consensus. Obviously, I think this is also the biggest challenge that we face as individuals working within government is communicating with the public, getting everyone that possibly can be involved, and trying to drive a consensus to make your job easier on the dais to be able to make these decisions. I also possess what I believe is very good project management skills. I think that will serve me well as director. I'm able to see a project from conception and the visualization of it through understanding what it takes to get the job done and the project built. So my communication skills, my project management skills, and I would say my leadership skills. I've been working the last several years with my staff at the CRA, overseeing the project managers, in the last 8 months, overseeing the entire staff, as well as obviously consultants. And it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of learning how to motivate your employees and your staff to be able to get the job done.
Did you want me to repeat the second part of that question?
Yes, if you would.
I don't think you addressed the second part. What do you think your biggest challenge in the position will be, and how would you overcome it?
So again, I guess I addressed the challenge part, not the overcoming. The challenge is, again, building that consensus and really making the public understand where the public dollars are being spent, and making sure that it is understood that we're doing, we're developing projects that are good for the city. I think you can only do that by continuing to reach out to the public. You have to reach out to them in the ways that they want to be spoken to. Not all communities communicate the same way, so I will make myself available to them in whatever way possible to be able to get the public really to understand what we are doing as an agency.
Got it? Commissioner, you have the next question.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Justice. What do you see as key differences in the role of the CRA Executive Director as a city employee and the CRA Executive Director as a contract employee? So first, and the second, I'll repeat it. As a city employee, how would you ensure proper oversight of the CRA contract and consulting?
So I think the key difference in having a city employee versus a contracted employee really has to do with oversight of the contract. And it's one thing that I know that administration and the board struggles with, and having somebody oversee that staff. The fact that the entire CRA was outsourced, I think was very beneficial to the city. I do believe, though, that you're making a wise decision bringing it in-house, because you have a sort of oversight from the director that can manage the contract, can manage the contract employees, and really has an understanding. Where I see my strengths is I really have an understanding of what that contract looks like and what the staff and contract should be upholding at this time. If you could repeat the second part, I will answer that as well.
As a city employee, how would you ensure proper oversight of the CRA contract and consultant? And I'm assuming it's consultants, but I'm not a consultant.
Yeah. So yes, we have multiple consultants. Obviously, RMA is the contractor over the CRA, but we oversee multiple consultants. I have consultants that work directly for the CRA. I have consultants that are architects, engineers. The RMA contract is staffing. So these individuals, are full-time within the department, and I would continue to maintain that level of professionalism. And again, I believe I'm in a unique position to oversee these contracted employees because I am extremely familiar with what the contract entails.
Thank you. Next question is from Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Justice. Yeah, let you grab a drink of water. Yeah, no problem. If you could describe the process you would follow to identify and address budget shortfalls in CRA projects in order to get those projects completed.
So budget shortfalls, budget shortfalls within, could you just repeat the question, within specific projects?
And address budget shortfalls in CRA projects in order to get those projects completed.
So I will talk about a couple different budget shortfalls. One being, obviously the city and the CRA with COVID right now and the impacts of COVID, we have to be extremely vigilant with our budgeting process. We do have some built-in safeguards to make sure that we can continue to move projects forward and continue to pay off our debt service with our bonds. So overall project, you have to look forward to, although next year we may have a good year, the year after we may start to see the impacts that COVID has brought to this community. So it's the foresight to look forward and make sure you have the funding to complete the projects. Within projects, we sometimes experience budget shortfalls. So within projects, again, building in enough reserves to make sure that we're completing the projects that we want to get completed, and making sure we don't overextend ourselves with too many projects that we cannot afford to fund.
Thank you. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Ms. Justice. Thank you for joining us. Our next question is, can you please tell us how you would handle a CRA project or deliverable you are responsible for, which is not completed on time, and how would you address the delay?
Well, I will tell you, I have not from one of my own projects experienced a delay or budget shortfall. However, I have, unfortunately, I have inherited a couple that I do believe we are going to suffer some challenges on, and I'm dealing with those right now. And you handle them by making sure that your contractors, that your consultants are delivering the items that they are supposed to be delivered to the city, to ensure, if they're not, that they're given a cure period to do that. And again, work with city staff to discuss what ramifications come when you don't meet your timelines and your budget. And this has to do with many capital projects we have many consultants working for us. So holding them all accountable and, and working together as a team really to get the project back on track. It's never our goal to get rid of consultants or change course because that will only further delay projects. But it's righting the ship and making sure that you're on top of all of your consultants to make sure that the deliverables are met.
Okay, I'll take the next question. Again, Ms. Justice, thank you for your interest in this position. Describe your experience working with culturally and economically diverse groups and how you build consensus among stakeholders to achieve an agency goal.
I think that, this is, as I mentioned with I believe Commissioner Peduzzi, is one of the biggest challenges is working in the public. And we work often in culturally diverse neighborhoods within the historic Northwest and in Pleasant City and in West Palm Beach. We've worked, and I've worked in particular to really, as I mentioned before, engage people that aren't used to engaging. We always have people that are are just naturally engaged, that come and speak at meetings, that are around. It's trying to engage those that were previously maybe uninterested or distrustful. And doing that, you have to get into the community and you have to determine how it is that they want to be communicated with, and what their needs are. I think that we've done a very good job of that. It's a work in progress, as with everything. But again, continuing to be within the community and having those conversations one-on-one is important.
Madam President, next question is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. In your view, what is the role of the CRA board versus the role of the CRA advisory board? How would you handle a situation where there are conflicting positions on a project between the CRA board and the CRA advisory board?
Well, the CRA, this board knows, the CRA advisory board is comprised of individuals within a certain CRA district that have different skill sets. So it may be, we have a contractor on the advisory board, we have a banker, we have a planner. So they provide a skill set for the CRA staff when we are bringing projects forward to let us know and inform us if we're heading perhaps in the wrong direction, to support us on redevelopment projects. Obviously, I think it's important for them to be involved and knowledgeable about all projects we have going on. Occasionally, their view is slightly different than the CRA board, and I will give an example in that as private individuals that work for private companies, many times these advisory board members obviously are thinking about private sector, and private sector is much different sometimes than the public sector. So occasionally we will have a situation where in the private sector, the CRA would be performing a project slightly different than the public sector would, and they may disagree on that. But if I would let them know that I was bringing something forward that they didn't agree with, or maybe they voted against, if I knew I had support of the CRA board. At the end of the day, the CRA board is the deciding factor.
Thank you. Next question is Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. How would you balance competing interests when you have to achieve an objective set by the CRA board, but which may run into opposition from some community members or stakeholder groups?
This happens, obviously, this happens with many projects. As elected officials, you are voted for by the public. You want the public's consensus, if at all possible, when moving a project forward. I believe the key is transparency and communication. And the more that you can communicate your goals, the CRA's goals, with the public, and try and gain a consensus with the public, the more support you're going to get. You're not ever going to get 100% support on any project, but the goal is to have the most people knowledgeable about it and able to discuss those projects with the CRA board.
Commissioner Neering.
Thank you. What are some recent redevelopment industry trends or practices you believe can be implemented in West Palm Beach to meet the CRA's strategic objectives?
Well, I look at, obviously we look at industry trends a lot through the Florida Redevelopment Association, through International Downtown Association, ULI. And one of the, obviously one of the things we always have to keep up with is legislation on CRAs, and what it is that we can and can't do. That's ever changing, and keeping up with that is extremely important. I also had the opportunity with the city to attend the NACTO conference last year, the National Association of Transportation Officials. That is important for the CRAs as well, because we are completing a lot of capital projects, and knowing the trends within mobility, transportation, I'm part of the Congress of New Urbanism, so planning. Those industry trends really are what guides our capital projects moving forward in the future.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Justice, given the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, what would you believe are the biggest challenges facing the CRA in the next 2 to 3 years, and how would you address those challenges as Executive Director?
So a couple of the challenges, obviously, our overall, as I mentioned before, our overall tax base. This agency is funded through ad valorem taxes. Although property values again are good this year, we believe that by 2022 that we'll see an impact due to COVID. The immediate impact, though, is with our businesses. Obviously, we've supported the businesses through some small grants to try and help them get through this process. But how are they going to long-term get through these times? I think as a CRA, some of the things that we can do is we can work with our businesses. Part of retaining these businesses is if they need to change their business model, if they need training on online portals, other ways to get their business out there. I think it's working with these businesses and understanding how we can help them weather the storm for the next couple of years. Again, this is twofold. One, the immediate impact of the businesses, and the longevity then of the tax base are the two issues that we face.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Justice, can you describe your experience in preparing and monitoring strategic finance plans?
Yes, I have overseen the budget process, or the strategic finance plan process, for the last 6 years for the CRA. The CRA, as this board is aware, has an overarching redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan really is the guideline and that we follow in our redevelopment projects. However, 15 or so years ago, this agency started creating a 5-year strategic plan, and it really takes those key elements from the redevelopment plan and works them forward for the next 5 years. So the 5-year plan looks obviously long-term in 5 years on the projects that we'll be completing. So these are a lot of our capital projects where we have to budget out over several years. We put together this plan, and along with that, we have an annual budget. So during the process of creating the 5-year plan, we also update the annual budget. That's where, if any changes occur, obviously we have modifications each year in our budget, and I have been helping prepare that budget over the last 6 years. Currently, again, in the process of preparing that budget again for both CRAs. It totals over $40 million for both CRAs, and I'm also managing $80 million worth of bond projects as well.
Thank you. Ms. Justice, if you were selected as a CRA Executive Director, how would you get up to speed on the expectations of the CRA Board and establish an effective working relationship with the CRA Advisory Board and community stakeholders?
I feel like, obviously, I've been in this role for the last 8 months. I feel I have a good communication with the CRA board members. I think, again, it's continuing to keep board members up to date on projects and items that might be coming forth to them, as well as the advisory board. I have not only speak with the advisory board on the monthly basis, I speak with them on a personal one-on-one basis if there are questions that we have that involve their expertise. If we have a banking question, I would ask my banker, their thoughts on it as well. So I think, again, it's just keeping the line of communication open, and hope to continue that relationship.
Those are all of the prepared questions. And as I understand it now, there's an opportunity for board members to ask any follow-up questions or other related questions? And we're not going in any particular order, so I will defer. Let me start out by saying, Ms. Justice, in my first question, I failed to ask the follow-up, which dealt with, if I could find it here, building a consensus. Yeah. So when I talked to you, we mentioned how you would work with culturally and economically diverse groups. And the other part of that question is, how would you build a consensus among stakeholders to achieve goals? So what are your particular strategies for building consensus?
Sure. Our particular methods are, it seems trivial, but asking the questions and surveying the residents. And you have to give them the ability to answer questions as they see fit. So some people are comfortable coming up to the podium and giving their opinion on a project. Others would rather do it anonymously through a survey. So it's talking to them in small enough groups where they feel comfortable talking, and then you have to get the information. And we build consensus that way by projects, and we have to obviously record the information or encourage people to come speak up if they're in favor or not of a project. So I think it's allowing them to speak is how you build a consensus. Otherwise, you don't hear from everyone.
But what if you hear people with strong opinions on opposite sides of the issue?
There will always be people on opposite sides, and all we can do is try and speak to them about the merits of the project, the value of the project. I will never be able to necessarily change someone's mind that's already made up about something, but I can speak to them. I would never shy away from speaking to them and encourage them to express why they don't like something. All we can do is try and explain to them the merits of the project.
Okay, very good. We do have some additional questions. Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, we have a number of projects throughout some very specific areas, namely the historic Northwest, Pleasant City, the Northwood Pleasant City CRA, that sometimes tend to churn. And what we're looking for is progress. So what would you do to try to push those projects over the finish line and encourage redevelopment in these areas that have sometimes been overlooked?
Well, I will tell you, many of these projects, as we all know, take longer. They just do. The planning process takes a long time. Building consensus takes a long time. And then getting it over the finish line. There are several in the Northwood Pleasant City that I'm currently working on to push forward, namely the anchor site and some projects on the north end. In downtown, during the 8 months that I've been working as interim director, I have pushed a couple of items over the finish line, namely the tent site project, which we'll see a conceptual of that in the next couple of weeks, which is an extremely important redevelopment project for this city, as well as obviously my work with the projects in the historic Northwest, Clematis Street, et cetera. And again, in Northwood Pleasant City, it is much more difficult. However, I believe that, again, working with these developers, staying on them, continuing to work with DOT on Broadway is what's going to eventually tip the scale in the north end.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Justice. Kind of a follow-up of the Mayor and Commissioner Schoaf's question. I feel like we're all kind of wanting some sort of change here with our CRA. And, specifically, we've brought this executive director position in-house. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts, besides the physical contracts that now this will be in-house versus contracted out, what other differences do you see that we will see changes in the future should you be hired for this role?
Well, I would say for me, and again, because we've been in a bit of a transition for the last several months, for me, it's bandwidth. You know, I feel like I know exactly what staff-wise I need to complete the projects that we have on the books, as well as getting new projects moving forward. So creating that bandwidth, getting the expertise in, and involved, and making sure that that we are moving these projects forward. I think that's the biggest difference, is just having, again, being at full staff, being able to focus and make decisions. Again, in an interim role, you know, there's a little bit of a lack of being able to be the decision maker and moving new things forward, just because of the position we were in. I think it gives me the opportunity to actually take on these projects and start moving the ones we have forward, as well as new projects.
Commissioner Peduzzi?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Justice, if you are selected as the CRA Executive Director, you will now be a city employee responsible to the CRA board. Since you are currently an RMA employee, do you believe that you will be able to be objective, in particular looking out for the city's interests when it comes to working with RMA?
Yeah. Obviously, I know that's an important question for the board, and you know, not only do I believe I can be objective, I believe that I am best served to manage a contract with RMA. I am very well versed in, again, what the contract is written for, what it's supposed to do. I believe that I've always been dedicated to the city. You know, obviously, you know, although RMA writes my paychecks, I report to this board. I always have felt that way. So my attitude as far as being dedicated to the city won't change, but my expectations of my consultants are always the same, no matter whether it was a former employee or a consultant that I work with today.
Thank you. And I think related to that issue is there may have to be some very tough, hard decisions that come down in the future regarding the RMA contract. There's been a recent audit report which wasn't totally complimentary toward the work of RMA. And the question is, can you make the tough call if the city's position becomes adverse, contrary to that of RMA, particularly with respect to the contract?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, really what's important, I know that the board it is a contract with RMA. I really, I look at it day to day as staff. You know, I believe it would be detrimental to the city to eliminate all of the staff that we have here that work under RMA currently. But the contract itself, I have no issues in recommendations and working with administration on how to move that contract forward. Again, to me, the importance is the people working under me, the staff, and whether they can complete the job that we've set out to do.
Madam President, you had another question?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question as to structure of staff. Currently, we do have project managers assigned to specific areas, but to my question previously of moving projects forward, would you, as the new director, be open to a structure where we had more of a focus, where there were senior level employees assigned to specific areas within each CRA district to really focus on those projects and move them forward. Would you be open to a structure of having those senior level people? Are you looking to focus on having more project specific consultants? What would be your strategy?
So my strategy would be, obviously I think the way I work with my staff and my management style is to focus on what their strengths are. So obviously we are light, I guess, down a senior level project manager, which I would hope to be able to bring on rapidly. I think the senior level project managers, obviously their focus needs to be more complex projects. The North End obviously is a complex project. I don't necessarily agree with only having project managers within specific areas. We have that now, but our project managers are specialized in certain areas. I do have them cross boundaries and districts to focus on what their strengths are. And I would foresee a similar type of structure in that it's not simply a project manager in a specific area, that we use their strengths and put them on projects that make sense to get them completed.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up about your relationship with RMA and the future of managing that contract. And I appreciate that you said you're the best served to manage the contract with RMA, and that you described a strategy that you might follow. But I'm curious if you can give us any specific examples, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with RMA. Maybe it could be with another contractor that you've had a relationship with, that you could demonstrate to us another time that you have exhibited the skills that it would take to do what you described when you answered the mayor's question.
Well, I believe that for this board, it would be most beneficial to give an example with RMA, and I'm okay to do that. As we've been through this 8-month process with the search for an executive director, I've met with RMA several times about the structure of the staff, about positions that I believe we need to rethink. Again, it kind of drew to the original benefit of the RMA contract, which is sometimes we're heavy on planning, sometimes we're heavy on engineering. Right now, we are heavy on construction, so I really, really need a good property manager and construction manager, which we do have now. But again, it was going to RMA and expressing the needs of this agency and the projects, and asking them to make modifications and make changes. And I've been able to do that as an employee. I would have obviously no problem doing it not being an employee.
Okay, Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Justice, it seems like lately I've been hearing a lot from different areas of the city that we need a change, that we may need to move in a different direction in certain areas. What are your thoughts? Are there any areas that you believe that we do need to refocus on, or any areas of change that you see as the interim CRA Executive Director?
I really think our change needs to come with our relationships with the community. There's a reason that people are expressing that they want change. Because they've seen something that they're not happy with. The overall consensus that I have heard is the projects themselves that are moving forward, that there's more projects that have ever been moving forward, that they're somewhat pleased with the direction that we're moving in that direction, but we have to be out there and hear them more. I think that's my biggest focus to change, is to hear where it is that they are looking, that they are looking for that change. And I think it's because a lot of people feel like they haven't been heard.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. That was actually the question I was going to ask, but then to follow up, I guess, Ms. Justice, on what you just mentioned about, I guess, communicating it and following up with them. Earlier, you mentioned that different demographics of different groups needed to be communicated with in different methods and different ways. I mean, are there suggestions for how you would communicate with them and find out what the different focuses should be? Are there any examples of the different ways you're working on outreach and things like that?
Yes, there are. And yeah, thank you for that, because there are things that I believe that we have that we've been implementing, that the CRA has been implementing, that I'd like to continue to move forward. For instance, there are, in some of our economically and socially lower income areas, we have people that aren't on social media or aren't on computers. So when you only communicate through social media, then you're missing a whole demographic of people. So we found that, again, we found in the historic Northwest that when we have an event or a community meeting, that yard signs are very effective. Keeping within the neighborhood and seeing what it is that is going on. We found that texting was effective. We have been working to establish neighborhood associations. The Pleasant City First has finally established their neighborhood association. They're struggling getting members. I think that we need to work on helping them get members of their neighborhood association, as well as the Historic Northwest. Dr. Alicia Wynn, who's working for us and also lives within the community, is working with a group of neighbors within the Historic Northwest to get a neighborhood association together. So I think it's, I focus on those communities in the Historic Northwest and Pleasant City, because I think those are the communities where we're not getting to that are important to communicate with.
Ms. Justice, what are your thoughts about the fact that Pleasant City is within the CRA district and Coleman Park is not?
I cannot tell you what happened when the CRA was created, but I can only say that I don't believe that should be so. I think when they created the CRA, Coleman Park should have likely been included within that CRA. I know originally when the CRA was created on the north end, Pleasant City wasn't even in the CRA. We amended the plan several years after the CRA was created to include Pleasant City. And absolutely, I think we struggle all the time with not being able to assist in Coleman Park as well.
Would you be in favor of an expansion of the CRA district to include Coleman Park?
I would. Obviously, you have to look at where those tax dollars are going to come from. Are we able to get the tax dollars and provide the redevelopment in that area with, is there enough, I guess? Is there enough if we include the Coleman Park? But yes, I would be in favor of that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. You got about a little bit under 5 minutes, Ms. Justice, if you want to make a closing statement, I suppose.
Let me just.
I'm sorry. Did I go out of turn, Ms. Johnson? I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to point out that the board should give Ms. Justice an opportunity to ask any questions of you all that she may have, in addition to making a closing statement.
Absolutely. Any questions you have for us, Ms. Justice?
I don't believe I have any questions for you at this time, but I would just like to thank you. I would thank you all for your time and your consideration of this again. I know this is the second time I've been through this, and I still believe that I am the most qualified candidate and have the most experience to do this job. I'm passionate about this city and look forward to continuing to work with the West Palm Beach CRA. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you again for your interest in this position. Thank you very much. So Ms. Johnson, I guess we'll have a few minutes as we bring in Mr. Rugg.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay.
I think the board can take perhaps maybe a 5 or 10 minute break, and we will shift gears and get the second candidate prepared.
So we will come back together at 10:55.
Yes, that would be fine.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
everyone here as well as the candidate. Is there any objection to starting a minute earlier? Hearing none. Let us resume. Welcome, Mr. Rugg. Thank you so much for your interest in this position. We'll have a series of questions asked by the various board members, and to the extent there may be follow-up questions as time permits. So we will dive right into the question. Ms. Johnson, was there anything you wanted to say before we begin the interview, please?
No, Mr. Mayor, you took care of it. Thank you.
Okay. Board members, we will rotate the questioning. Madam President had the first question with the last candidate, so we'll start this time with Commissioner Peduzzi and go in order. Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mr. Rugg. Thank you for expressing your interest in the CRA Executive Director position. Could you share with us how your experience, education, and background have prepared you to become the CRA Executive Director for the City of West Palm Beach?
Sure, absolutely. And good morning, Commissioner Peduzzi, Mayor, City Commissioners. If I could just start out with a brief introductory statement. I'm extremely enthusiastic about this opportunity, and I can't thank you all enough for your consideration for me for this position. I have a deep love for this city. I think that's been shown over the last 7 years of working with the City of West Palm Beach, going on 8 this December. And having grown up in South Florida and having been on the top of the Bell South building with my father 35 years ago when he was working there, and seeing City Place come out of the ground, and even having been married right down the street at a local West Palm Beach church, I've got deep roots in this community. My experience and why I'm the best candidate for this position is growing up locally, being in school here, and seeing the growth of the region over the last 40 odd years. And then going to Florida Atlantic University and getting a degree in political science, and then working with the local Home Builders Association, giving me tremendous experience in the development industry. And then from there, also coming to the City of West Palm Beach and working as the Economic Development Director, where I've been to date, and developing strong ties with the business community and getting a very firm understanding of where the city needs to go and where it is going relative to economic development overall. Recently, I was certified as an economic development professional by the International Economic Development Council. That's of last October. And those skills culminate into me being the best person for this job. Now more than ever, there is a tremendous need for leadership in the city as it relates to the CRA position. And I feel like I can bring that to the table. We are experiencing seismic shifts across the country right now, and things are going to be drastically different moving forward. And I believe that I will provide that leadership to this position that's going to be needed to address those challenges that we are going to face, many of which we don't even know yet. But it is without question a very unique time in this city's history. And I'm prepared to bring all passion, enthusiasm, and excitement and hard work, no matter what the challenges that come up.
Thank you. Commissioner Nearing.
Thank you, Mr. Rugg, for your time this morning. Can you identify what you consider the top 3 skills you possess which will make you successful in the position of CRA Executive Director? It's the first part, and I can repeat the second question, which is, what do you think your biggest challenge in the position will be, and how you would overcome it? So just very quickly again, identify what you consider to be your top 3 skills you possess.
Well, my top 3 skills that I possess, number 1 is leadership. and bringing a strong sense of leadership to the position that will allow me to bring together the interest, the consensus, and vision of all bodies needed in order to move the CRA and progress forward for the city. Second is a very strong background in the development community and in construction, which plays a big part into the CRA. And then lastly, my ability to get out in front. I like to be out into the community. I am very much a fan of speaking to large groups and to really also meeting individually one-on-one with those folks in the community so that everybody understands exactly where the CRA is going and what we need to do in order to overcome challenges. And I'm sorry, the second part of the question, Commissioner, if you could just repeat it.
No problem. It's a long question. What do you think your biggest challenge in the position will be and how you would overcome it?
This position is going to be a very tough position, and I have full understanding about that. There are several large challenges. If I had to say what the biggest challenge is going to be, I would say first and foremost, it's bringing the groups and neighborhoods that are part of the CRA need to be included into the economic progress of the city, without a doubt. It's gone on too long where we need to start raising everybody up with the economic inclusion and the benefits that have happened throughout this city. So number one is how can we address the challenge of economic equity and inclusion within our city, number one. That was shown by the 17% poverty rate that came out in the economic development study. And I still think that we need to address that head on through talent through business development. Second is the climate issues that we face globally, and that's a much bigger challenge that involves obviously a lot more than just the city of West Palm Beach, but I think that's something that's significant, and that health and wellness of our communities and how we're going to address those challenges, because nobody should be left behind in any of those improvements and those issues that we need to address first without question. And then and these are all about equal to one another. The last is education. My time as the economic development director has shown that we need to the lifeblood of economic development for the city and for community redevelopment is going to be through education. And having strong talent pool and doing those place-based economic development strategies where we can bring those schools up and make sure that we have robust educational institutions is going to be key. So those are probably the three biggest challenges that I think are going to be faced. There's no one on any given day because they all sort of shift as time goes on.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Rube. This question is also two parts. So the first part is, what do you see as key differences in the role of the CRA Executive Director as a city employee and the CRA Executive Director as a contract employee? And then as a city employee, how would you ensure proper oversight of the CRA contract and consultant?
Okay, so the first part is the differences that I see is that when you're an employee of the city, obviously you answer to the city. You have the CRA board and the six of you sitting as that body, and that's who you're accountable with. You all were elected and you have a tremendous amount of legitimacy when it comes to moving policies, and you're at the end of the day responsible for all of those. And as the CRA Executive Director hired by the city, I'm an extension of that. As a consultant, all due respect to consultants or outsourced contractors, they are great, but they are confined to the contracts that they are party to. And that's a lot of times what they have to fulfill and not much more than that. So I feel like when you are, the main difference is you're much more vested as a city or as an employee of the city, as the executive director. How I would ensure, and the second part of your question is how would I ensure the accountability of the contract that the CRA is in, is number one, obviously got to read through the contract. And then I think that regular and ongoing updates about the accountability of that contract to the CRA board are critical. And a big fan of constant reporting and bringing those aspects up to make sure that on a monthly or quarterly basis, whatever the CRA board is comfortable with, but bringing those accountability discussions up to make sure that there is constant compliance with the contract that is in place between the city and RMA.
Oh, Commissioner Fox?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Root, for joining us today. Can you describe the process you would follow to identify and address budget shortfalls in CRA projects in order to get those projects completed?
You know, I think that this is going to be a big challenge moving forward when it comes to not only projects, but also staffing from state governments all the way down as it relates to the pandemic. I think first and foremost is to take a hard look at what is currently budgeted, what those projects look like, and almost begin sort of a triage manner of what can be addressed and what can't be addressed. And then I think it's a very open conversation with the CRA board and then also with the CRA board, and bringing as many collective minds together to figure out how we can bridge the gaps to still achieve the goals of the CRA, but in a very fiscally prudent manner. When I was with the Home Builders Association early in my career, I watched as in 2008, as the entire home building industry essentially crumbled. We lost 70% of the home building industry during that time, and it was terrible. So during that time, as the executive director of the Home Builders Association, we had to make some very tough decisions about what we were going to prioritize and what we weren't. The Home Builders Association is still around today. It's obviously vastly different, but I think it's a good example of how I helped manage and weather an organization through a very difficult fiscal time when, frankly, we were losing tremendous amounts of revenue, and but still ended up being effective as an organization.
Thank you. Mr. Rook, tell us how you would handle a CRA project or deliverable for which you are responsible, which is not completed on time, and then how would you address the matter of the delay?
Well, first, I would want to understand why it wasn't delivered, and what the problems are with why it wasn't delivered. Number one, and obviously try to fix those problems immediately. And then from there, I'm very much a fan of that. If you constantly can't get things done, then we probably need to readdress the project overall. And perhaps those projects may need to go away, or those projects may need to end. But first and foremost, I would get to the details of the project to understand exactly what happened and why there is a delay. And being the CRA executive director, if I were to get this position, I would be the responsible party for all that. I'm very much a fan or believe in that as the top level, I would hold all of the accountability for all the projects that the CRA is available or is party to, and ensure that those projects, if they aren't met on time, the board knows as soon as possible, and we address those issues as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Madam President.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Rook, for your interest and for being here today. Can you please describe your experience working with culturally and economically diverse groups, and how would you build consensus amongst stakeholders to achieve agency goals?
So most of my experience with working with culturally diverse groups has been with the city of West Palm Beach. And during that time, frankly, most recently when we were updating the economic development plan, it involved reaching a broad consensus of groups, including all chambers, Black chamber, women chambers, Hispanic chambers, and all business owners, all areas of the community, and then also the school district. Aside from that, my other experience involves, and still to this day, even though not as much as it was in the past due to the schools being closed, was actually getting into the actual tactics, the daily tactics of trying to improve things, namely literacy at Northmore Elementary, where I would go into the classroom and actually see these children that need to have better literacy outcomes in their schools. That combined with working on the economic development plan, I think has given me a pretty strong background in working with diverse groups and how we can all come together to see a plan move forward. Aside from that, I would also rely on quite a bit of, frankly, folks that I think we have a tremendous amount of talent in connections with the diversity or with minority populations in the city, right here in the city, or I'm sorry, right as part of city staff. And I think using those resources and working with the minority business community would give us a very strong, or would give me a very strong approach to building those connections with the minority communities in the city.
Commissioner Peduzzi?
Thank you, Mayor. In your view, what is the role of the CRA board versus the role of the CRA advisory board? How would you handle a situation where there are conflicting positions on a project between the CRA board and the CRA advisory board?
Thank you, Commissioner. So the CRA board sets the policy and budget for the CRA and where we're going to go. As the elected body, and again, as the legitimately elected group from the city of West Palm Beach has the authority to set all of that. The CRA advisory board is just that. It's an advisory board that advises the CRA, the main CRA board. However, I believe the CRA board has a tremendous amount of resources and expertise within the community that can help move projects and finer aspects of the plan forward. Now, if there is a difference or a difference of opinions between the two groups, and I've run into this several times, I believe that there's always there are ways to build consensus, and that's generally through robust discussion and understanding where the differences lie. The CRA board, the CRA board and the CRA advisory board, many times I have to think most of the time agree on a lot of the tactics that the CRA needs to achieve. However, it may get into some of the details that I think through discussion, you can always develop either another option or share the options that are on the table and understand where the differences really lie. And I think through those discussions, once you go through those options that are available, some type of solution generally shows itself that everybody can agree on. And then I think that's the solution that you move forward with, if at all possible.
Commissioner Neary?
Thank you. Mr. Rube, how would you balance competing interests when you have to achieve an objective set by the CRA board, but which may run in opposition from some community members or stakeholder groups?
Thank you, Commissioner Nearing. I think it's very similar to the last question that Commissioner Peduzzi just asked, which is, again, I mean, understand what are the differences? Where do they not align? Where do they not agree? And is there a way, or is there some type of balance where perhaps, again, if you can address a single detail or a single or some type of aspect or characteristic of whatever the project is, or plan or direction, And then again, bringing that forward to the table as part of the discussion and sharing that with the CRA board to understand, okay, this is what we're hearing. This is what the CRA board wants to go together. I think that there is a third direction that could sort of, that could build the bridge between the two and develop that consensus that's needed. And from there, figure out a way to move forward. Rarely have I seen in a project in the city of West Palm Beach where there is no third direction or there is no really way to develop some type of consensus. Those tend to be the exception, not the rule. Understanding that the robust dialogue, community engagement, and understanding the hard work has been done to bring folks, to bring everything to the table, to have the hard discussions that sometimes need to occur so that we can make the right policy calls moving forward.
Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you. Mr. Rugg, what are some recent redevelopment industry trends or practices you believe can be implemented in West Palm Beach to meet the CRA's strategic objectives? And if you could be specific, that would be great.
So I think one of the biggest trends is in place-based economic development, and that is investing in the people and places that you have, what your assets are currently, and investing in them heavily and intentionally, and being laser focused on that. I think the West Palm Beach Center for Arts and Technology is one of those very specific projects and tasks that can, and that goes back to a trend of investing in your people and in the entrepreneurs in your community and the talent that currently exists here, and building on that. That's number one. Some of the other areas and trends is diversification of transportation. Now more than ever, we know that a lot of our minority areas, one of the big reasons why there's a hindrance to social mobility or economic mobility is just not being able to get to places and getting things done. And lastly, I would say some robust services. One of the big trends is that it's amazing what happens when you provide things like universal childcare. Not only does it provide a tremendous amount of benefit to the child early on from a literacy standpoint, but you also unlock a lot of parents that can then provide income and work for their families and provide employment. So I think if we can identify, and there's a lot of great practices out there, there's no shortage of ideas and expertise between the Brookings Institute and Bruce Katz and New America with Dr. Slaughter, who's identified where the workforce trends are going in this country. There's so many great bits of information and ideas out there that we can implement. And a lot of times we already are, that not only can we put those into our community and provide a benefit to our local residents, but at the same time, we can also become sort of a leader for the state of Florida and in our region to be a place where these progressive ideas are being put into place and we're seeing a positive benefit as a result. And now all of a sudden we become a leader in the state of Florida as a test bed for these new ideas and a place that's seen as innovative, transparent, and productive.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. Mr. Rugg, given the impact of COVID-19 crisis, what do you believe are the biggest challenges facing the CRA in the next 2 to 3 years, and how would you address those challenges as Executive Director?
Well, again, I think, Commissioner, thank you. Some of the biggest challenges, I'll talk a little bit about short-term and long-term. I mean, I forget the commissioner that posed the question earlier about some of the challenges, but again, I would still go back to that economic equity and making sure that everybody is coming along, is getting the benefit of economic growth in the city of West Palm Beach, number one. But that is a much more long-term goal that I think does take time. In the short term, I was listening to a podcast this morning. It was a Freakonomics podcast about how the country can avoid a Great Depression. And it gets into preserving the businesses that we have currently. And I do think that our businesses right now are in desperate need of assistance, and that still has to play itself out. But the results are that if we don't take serious action, both on the local, state, and national level, that a lot of those businesses may be lost forever. And it makes sense that we invest in those businesses now. We already know before, in a good economy, that 80 to 90% of our job growth is going to come from our existing employers. So we need to preserve what we have now. So on the short term end, it's protecting the businesses and what we have currently in place. Aside from the economic equity on a longer term basis, I think it's also the climate and educational needs. On a shorter term, in addition to the businesses, we are going to have to address some hard questions as it relates to our budget and taking a hard look at some of our projects and what we can and can't achieve in a timely manner. And was it the top three? You're muted, Commissioner.
Commissioner, you're muted.
Sorry, it was just, I think you hit it. It's just, what do you believe are the biggest challenges? It wasn't a specific.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Rube, describe your experience in preparing and monitoring strategic finance plans.
So thank you, Mayor. During my time as the Economic Development Director for the City of West Palm Beach, granted it was a much smaller budget, but every year I took a hard look at my budget to understand how that budget aligns with the city's economic development plan. And every year we have a series of commitments that were generally made with the state of Florida for QTI, qualified targeted industry grants, where each year we have to pay out a certain amount of time or a certain amount of cash as it relates to the jobs that created by private corporations. And that budget grew over a series of time. In addition to that, the city was lucky enough to get a tremendous amount of grant dollars that were matched with public dollars that required accountability and required monitoring to ensure that those grant dollars and the city dollars were both spent according to the way that the grant was issued. That combined with just general projects and building improvement grants that the city has maintained over time, I spent quite a bit of time putting together budgets and financial plans that both match strategic priorities from the city, but also maintained and fulfilled the obligations that the city entered into as it relates to economic development projects. That will equate easily into the CRA's program. Obviously, the CRA's budget is much more complex, but I believe that those skills, along with a lot of the resources that exist with the city and with the CRA, put me in a good position to take a fresh look at the CRA and provide some, I think, some fiscal prudence to the budget to see how we can weather this fiscal storm that I believe is going to be moving forward.
Thank you. Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rug, if you were selected as the CRA Executive Director, how would you get up to speed on the expectations of the CRA Board and establish an effective working relationship with the CRA Advisory Board and community stakeholders?
Thank you, Commissioner. Luckily, being that I've been with the city for the last 7 years, and during that time worked very closely with the Community Redevelopment Agency, there's not a large learning curve that I believe needs to occur as a result. How I get up to speed, I think, with the individual CRA boards and board as a collective is through individual meetings with the board members to understand their priorities, visions, and thoughts as it relates to the CRA strategic plan and finances. Then I think it's and then meeting with that board collectively. And then I think it's the same approach with the CRA Advisory Board, individual meetings to understand each advisory board member's viewpoints and where they would, their thoughts and opinions. and then meeting with them collectively to give some idea and some findings of what I've discovered. And then I think it's sort of bringing both of the two research exercises together and sharing both of those with both boards. And then I think through that, the gaps or perhaps differences of opinion will be illustrated. And then once you know what those issues are, we could definitely address any problems moving forward. But at that point, I think you're up to speed and you can get moving pretty quickly.
Okay, that concludes the round of set questions. And now it's open to any follow-up questions or additional questions that board members might have. One question I do want to ask Mr. Rube is, do you feel that you are at a disadvantage because you've not been involved with the nuts and bolts, if you will, of operations of a CRA organization? And if so, how would you overcome that perceived disadvantage?
Well, to answer your question, Mayor, is that I would, I guess it would be a bit of a handicap, but not much, because I think that the best way to overcome that is once you get into the position, you start figuring it out pretty quickly. I believe that I'm a quick study. I've shown that over time. I've run the economic development program and essentially built it. Prior to me, there wasn't even an economic development plan in the city. So during that time, I mean, a lot of the economic development initiatives that have been proposed and brought forward, I built from the ground up. So I believe that I could overcome it easily. We've got a great team in place, I think. I've worked with all of them in the past, and it wouldn't be a very large learning curve at all to get a handle on where the some of the nuts and bolts that maybe I don't know about where they are located, but at the end of the day, it won't be anything that I think I haven't run into before or in the past.
Thank you. Madam President, you had a follow-up question?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rube, this is a question that I ask of other candidates as well. In specific areas, namely the historic Northwest, Pleasant City, Northwood, CRA, we have several projects that have either churned and taken a long time, or we've had a lack of development that where other areas of the city have been growing, these areas have stayed stagnant. So what would you do as CRA Executive Director to help push these projects over the finish line and attract new development to these areas that are really sorely needed?
Thank you, Commissioner. Number one is obviously get into the details of those projects, find out what is holding them up, and get a very good handle on the challenges that are faced. Second is very much engage the private sector. A lot of the development projects, I believe, we have a tremendous amount of expertise in the private community, in the private sector, that I think can help with a lot of these challenges. And in a lot of instances, they want to help. The private sector in the city of West Palm Beach and our business community wants our city to be successful so much. And so many times they're offering resources that I think need to be taken advantage of. And I would probably engage a lot of the expertise that is available in the private sector to understand how we can overcome those challenges. And then as far as attracting new capital or new investment into the city of West Palm Beach and into those areas, I think we need to take a look at the business climate, both from a regulatory standpoint, and then also from perhaps a financial and from a financial perspective. Maybe there's a different way that a project needs to be financially addressed, or incentives need to be shifted in some form, or that the regulatory environment that currently exists is not prudent for the development community to properly address, or both. But those are just some general ideas on how to get them moving. There's a lot of expertise out there that I think hasn't been tapped into. We have CDFI resources. I think freeing up some of our freeing up staff to be hyper-focused and intentional on specific areas of the CRA is very important. As you mentioned, some areas of the city are doing very well, and we have agencies that I think can take those sections over, and we can sort of shift the projects over to that agency, and then in turn take the CRA staff and be hyper-focused and intentional on the projects that need to get done. Sometimes it's just a matter of having too much on your plate. We can be much more effective if we remain laser-focused on specific projects.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Rugg, you sort of answered this question in your last answer, but maybe there's an opportunity to expand on it or share some other thoughts. So my question was that we've been hearing from the community as well as members of this board that they'd like to see some major changes in the leadership of our CRA. And even earlier in this interview, you said you'd like to take a fresh look at some of the CRA strategies. Can you give us any insight into some of those areas that you might look for implementing these changes?
So yes, I mean, I think number one, that the historic Northwest and the Pleasant City Broadway corridor, I think they need the most intentional focus and addressing those areas. I think we have a great downtown development authority. They are so many great ideas and initiatives that are now being desired citywide have come out of that group that I think that they are a resource that can be relied on heavily. They also get funding from the CRA. So I think that that's a great resource out there that we can tap into more, that frees up city staff to be more hyper-focused on the areas that really we need to address wholeheartedly. And that's the historic Northwest, the Pleasant City, the Broadway corridor, where we just need to start getting, I think, a little bit more intentional, a little bit more focused on getting those projects going and getting those initiatives underway, so that it's just we start seeing, I think, the progress that everybody is sort of feels like it's on the cusp of change. But now more than ever, if we could just be intentional, I think it would help. It would be very helpful.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. Mr. Rugg, earlier you mentioned, that there's no shortage of ideas, that you're hearing some good things that other communities are doing in the podcast you're listening to, and that there's a lot of ways that we can be addressing equity issues. And two of the things that you mentioned specifically were education and universal childcare. And I was just curious, I think you're right that the ideas are sometimes the easy part, but the implementation of some of these ideas, I just was curious, like right now, I think during COVID, the inequity in education has never been more apparent. I've been sort of cohabitating with my two nieces, and they don't have any idea how to use computers or whatever. And I just think, I'm curious if you have given any thought to those two specifics, since you mentioned them, just about any ways to implement, looking at the education portion, I guess, specifically. Are there ideas that you have? Or I think sometimes, this is maybe the change people are talking about, like looking at completely different areas we could be focusing on in the CRA, but it's, often hard to actually get to the implementation stage. So.
Absolutely. It is very hard to get into the implementation stages, but and I have put a lot of thought into those two things, mainly because education and our education work. I've been implementing the memorandum of understanding with Northmore Elementary for the last 5 years. And that school, which was identified as the school that the city was going to help with initially, was identified because it was an F-rated school 5 years ago. And the school district and the city both said, that is where we need to address and start first. And since then, now that school has an achievement level of being a C-rated school and is on the cusp of being a B. It's very, very close. It's only a couple of points away from it. And again, that's through dedicated resources, dedicated partnerships, where the school district and the city, we both work together on a very specific plan to improve the literacy levels for that school. When we look at the CRA, the historic Northwest, UB-Kinsey is right there in the backyard. And there's got to be an opportunity there. It is an art school, and we're building a cultural center right down the street from it. There's got to be some synergy there between the Sunset Lounge, the West Palm Beach Center for Arts and Technology, and UB-Kinsey. And the three of them together, you know, just being a great amenity for a walkable community, just screams for families that want to move into that location. And if you can just add a little bit more to it and provide a dedicated program where you have some type of childcare so that families feel comfortable, and maybe it's right across the street from UB-Kinsey, so that it's a pre-K program that goes right into elementary school. I mean, Vonda Daniels, when she implemented the pre-K program at Northmore Elementary, she had a waiting list within a month, and then she opened up another one, and now that one has a waiting list. So once we get out of this COVID issue, I mean, we're still going to address these same challenges. In the meantime, there's got to be some ways that we can address the technology issue, either through holding classes, helping with maybe the distribution of computers, understanding where the internet challenges are with some type of, you know, where the digital divides lie, and creating more reasons for families to be in that community, because I can't think of a better community. That the historic Northwest alone has a walk score of 74. If you build a great, safe, walkable community with great schools, you're just, it's almost like unlocking a secret. It takes time, but eventually you're going to see great progress. And I think the biggest challenge then is making sure that we don't displace people as a result of building all of these great amenities and these great services for that area of the city. And then I think it's the same story with Pleasant City and Roosevelt Estates, or Roosevelt Elementary, even though it's outside of the CRA. But I mean, collectively, you start building this network of schools, and then all of a sudden you've got a city that is known for talent. And then it's generating jobs, it's generating a lot of great things that we can all be proud of. I know I'm getting a little bit long-winded, I apologize.
Okay, Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rugg, what are your thoughts, or I'd like to hear your thoughts regarding our contract with RMA, and what's your opinion regarding the continued utilization of RMA as our primary staffing provider for the CRA?
Well, I think right now, well, first off, when it was put in place, I think it served a purpose and got a lot of great things going. And then now, as moving forward, I do believe that bringing it back in-house and having perhaps a plan on how we're going to bring that back in-house is going to be where the city should move in the long term. Again, I think that's because we've got a lot of great staff members. We've got a lot of great personnel that works inside City Hall, and I think that a lot of times we can keep them inside City Hall. It'll spell much more opportunity for the city moving forward. So with the contract, I think we're going to have to take some hard looks at it and figure out how we can incrementally move the CRA inside internally over time. But I think it's a good move overall.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, and we are running out of time. So, Mr. Rugg, I want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions of us that you might have. Or alternatively, you have about 2.5 minutes, a closing statement. So.
Okay. Well, I think, Mayor, Commissioners, I think that as the potential leader, if I do get the position, I think that you'll have a lot of confidence in knowing that you'll have somebody that is always accessible to you and that has a deep passion for the city and a desire to be innovative and progressive with approaching things in a fresh manner. I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there that haven't been taken advantage of. We've got a lot of small businesses that I think could spring up if they just get a little bit of nurturing, like trap kitchens in the Northwest. I mean, there's a lot of people cooking a lot of great food, and that can just be one stepping stone to greater economic development in those areas. Any way to just expand the reach and take those ideas that come out of the CRA and then expand them into a much greater city, a city policy, I think is also a great opportunity that I think I bring, because overall the success of one area of the city is the success for all of the cities. And we should take those best ideas. And I think that I bring a lot of those ideas to the table and can help lead the CRA and level up in the coming years. So thank you so much for the consideration, and I'm truly humbled by this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your interest in the position. And that concludes this part of the process, board members. And I think our next meeting is going to be on July 2nd on this particular item, So thank you all very much. Any closing words, Ms. Johnson?
No, Mayor, I was just going to highlight the fact that you have part 2 of the interview process on Thursday, which ties into the point you just made.
Okay, very good. Thank you all very much. This meeting is adjourned.